Welcome to Beyond the Portrait. So real talk, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. This is a human issue that I think everybody should be more informed about. We're talking fertility. We're talking about IVF and preconception, lifestyle choices. It's a really great conversation by one of the most brilliant minds I've ever come across. My dear friend, Nara Lee, she is Harvard educated, Columbia Law educated, was a lawyer for a few years, and then switched gears to turn that brilliant mind into solving the fertility crisis. And Nara has created Doveras, which is a beautiful company that supports people who are looking to get pregnant, people who are considering getting pregnant, or people who need surrogacy. This is not one to be missed. It is something that impacts everyone, whether you're looking to conceive or you're wanting to become more educated on this type of process. So without further ado, Nara Lee. Hi, Nara. I'm so excited to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining. This is going to be so fun, and it's always a pleasure to see you.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to have you start with your name, where you live, and your pronouns.
My name is Nara. I live in New York City, and I am a she, her.
Fantastic. All right. So let's get started. I want to talk about, so I think we've talked before that this is a time capsule. So I think getting a little bit of your past informs the future. It also informs your present. So let's talk a little bit about your childhood and some teen years and just kind of how that's informed how you see the world.
I love that you call it a time capsule, by the way. I look forward to listening to this in I don't know how many years' time and laughing with you about it. But to answer the question, I was born in Seoul, Korea. My parents moved as a result of their jobs every 2 to 4 years. So there was a lot of transitioning throughout my childhood and also my teen years. I moved to different countries, different schools. I went to 4 or 5 different high schools and ended up in the US for college. And so obviously something that was really core to my upbringing was change and also a strong sense of family because my parents and my sister and I were foreigners or completely new to an entirely new society every few years together. And I think that change has served really valuably in my life. I think I became an entrepreneur as a result in some ways because of the comfort with dealing with that change. But also, I think it allowed me to be inclusive in the way I think about the world and approach the world as well, because I was always dealing with people very different from me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that kind of change, it's something that you're very good at. Like, so for the audience, Nara and I have been really besties for like many years now. And so I know kind of how she operates, and she's so like elegant and calm under pressure. And she just kind of goes with the flow, which is like one of the best things about Nara. So I love that it came from being exposed to multiple countries and just kind of different people. And as a child, that probably was really challenging.
Definitely. I think, there's always a rose and a thorn. I think the glamorous side of it is that you feel very international. You feel like you have all these worldly experiences, but it's a very isolating and lonely experience, not having a real hometown or a sense of belonging, not having other people remember, sort of your childhood. And even now, when I go back home is sort of a loose concept because it's wherever my parents are, and they've retired now. So it's, an apartment in Korea that I've never even lived in or stepped foot in the past, right? And so there's always two sides to a story. And of course, it was very difficult. Making friends at any age is very difficult. But I think making new friends in a new environment is especially challenging in a new language, in a new country. But I think you have to take what you can get of it. And of course, have to acknowledge the privilege that comes with that experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were some of the countries that you lived in, just to kind of, I know what they are, but just for the audience?
Yeah. A lot of the countries were in the Far East. And so Korea, China, Japan were mostly the countries that I lived in, but different cities within those countries too.
Yeah, I mean that's so how we met for the audience is we have a mutual friend, Talay, and you guys met when you guys were in high school in Tokyo. And what I love about Talay is she's French Lebanese but she grew up in Tokyo. And so it's been cool to kind of have these friends that are so global. Like I kind of think of you guys as like citizens of the world. But I know that both of you have kind of struggled with that sense of home. And it is kind of like where your parents and your family are. But I think also having been your friend for as many years as I've been, it's been really illuminating to see how good you are at keeping friendships. So you have friends all over the world and you're always jetting off to somebody's wedding. And, it's like, it's, I think very cool that you have that skill because I don't think everybody has that skill if you've only lived in one place.
Oh, thank you for that. I needed to hear that.
Well, I think you're really excellent at it. And building community is something that I think you're extremely good at. And it does take a village. And, that has shown up in your life for sure. So, the choice to move to America, it was because of college, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I came here for college with 2 suitcases. I don't know what I was thinking, honestly.
I mean, it's very brave of you.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I do know. I was excited about the opportunity. I always had a sense that I was going to go abroad for college. Ended up applying to colleges in the US, which is something I desperately wanted when I was in high school. And got accepted, went to Harvard, and the rest is sort of history. I thought I would be here for 4 years. I didn't really think past that. And then, I've been here for decades now.
Yeah.
So my life is very much fully in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. So you went to Harvard for your undergrad and then you went to Columbia for law school. What was that kind of intention of becoming a lawyer? Like, what were the thoughts behind that?
When I was at Harvard, I wrote my senior thesis on intellectual property rights and intellectual property law enforcement. And that was a big passion of mine at that time. And so I decided to look into that further by practicing law. And so I applied to law school and took a lot of courses on IP rights in law school too, and ended up practicing law for the first few years of my career.
Very cool. So when we first met, I had been confiding in you that I was struggling with kind of worthiness and self-worthiness in the workplace. And you shared that at the firm that you were working for, the law firm, that you would bill in 6-minute increments. And my mind was blown. Like to have your time be worth what you were charging in 6-minute increments was really like outstanding. What was that like to kind of have to work in those types of constraints? And did it impact your self-worth when, you're making, the money that you were making in 6-minute increments?
I think that's a great question. So most large corporate law firms have their attorneys bill on that schedule. So it's not unique to just the law firm that I was at. And the law firm charges you out in those billing increments. It's not that you necessarily get paid based on the, billing cycle or the way that you are billing in those increments. But I do think it begs the question about how you control and spend your time. I think there's a sense of urgency. I think there is also the sense of work that is tied inherently to time because it is such a finite resource. And I think it sets up a culture that, well, you can look at it in 2 ways. One, really creates this expectation of perfection because you are charging per minute essentially at such a high value. But also, I think it is difficult to say that there is this sense at a junior level of really understanding necessarily what you are learning or what you are doing because you are so fixated on the billing cycle, how you are, spending your time doing your client work. And so particularly because these law firms make you work so hard and there's so much work to be done, it was a stage in my career where I felt like I was certainly learning a lot, but was less sure about my purpose in life.
Yeah. And I'm sure that kind of pressure is probably why you decided to leave law, right? Because the work-life balance it was becoming too overwhelming.
I think it had a part to do with it. I left because there was a different issue that I thought warranted my attention, which ended up being Doveras. But part of it was that while I was, working as an associate at a law firm, that I was trying to figure out and understand my personal life. I had met my now husband back in college. We were thinking about getting engaged, getting married, starting a family one day. And there were very few resources on how to navigate that journey. And ultimately, trying to figure out that process while working with the type of intensity that I did was really incompatible. And I was trying to see if somebody else could take on my, problems and if I could outsource the sort of questions that I had, could not find a solution. And so that's where the genesis of Doveras was born. I was starting to think a lot about why doesn't the service exist? And yeah, that's I think in that way, yes, the crazy work schedule certainly helped propel me into entrepreneurship, but it was really the issue itself that was the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pain point that stems from personal life, but it actually leads you to your purpose. But it's like you only see that in hindsight, right? Like, because I remember when you were working there, you were working all the time and it was like, Nara's here, Nara's there. And, it's like, and that just wasn't what your purpose was. But you had to have a circumstance what kind of made you question, is this what I want for my life? And I wonder what that, because we're going to Harvard and going to Columbia, like that, those are really big achievements. So were you kind of scared to say goodbye to law, or were you more just excited because you had found your purpose?
In a weird way, I don't feel like I said goodbye to law. I still feel like it is a big part of my life. Partially because I still keep up with the attorney trainings and stuff, but also because I do not regret the fact that I went to law school or the years of training that I had, actually practicing capital markets law. Either like you said, I think it's really easy to make statements in hindsight. Like everything makes sense in hindsight. And part of that sense that made sense to me, reflecting back on that phase of my career, was that, I did practice law as a healthcare attorney in the capital market space. I have an understanding of how to process, clinical information. And all of that became part of the DNA in my current company. And maybe it wasn't immediate the first iteration of the company, but it certainly became more obvious later on, right? And so because I felt like I was making the best decision for myself at the time, I know that sounds really trite, but it really was something I was genuinely excited by. And also because all those years of, hard work and training did teach me a sense of excellence, a sense of standard that I wanted to achieve. And also, I think, and something that I really value about my years at my law firm that I practiced at is just the amazing intelligence of everyone that surrounded me. And so the biggest challenge was keeping up with everyone around me. And I think that is something not to be taken for granted. And so when you put all those things together, it's really hard to say, man, like that time was for naught, or I shouldn't have pursued that. There maybe have been a more linear path to where I am now, because I really honestly don't think I would have landed where I am now, but for those experiences on.
I think that's a really good distinguishing factor. I think a lot of people think that life is linear, and that is not true. And every person that I've been talking to on this, and I've found this in my own life, everything that we've been learning, about like where we are, it's like you had to have those experiences because they informed what you're doing now. And if you hadn't have learned those things, you wouldn't be where you are now. So I'm really trying to like lean into the fact that there's no one way to get to where you're supposed to be, but usually when you're looking at the course of someone's life, every single thing that they've done was actually an essential part. So for people who are second guessing, oh, I want to make a change, but is it going to be for naught that I spent all this time? I would challenge them and say, no, actually, this probably is going to inform your future, and there's no mistakes. Like you were supposed to learn those things, and that was the way that you could have learned them. You wouldn't have learned those things other ways. And I found that with my own career. Like I kind of bounced around in my specialties. I bounced around. I like worked at a stock photography agency, which at the time I was like, oh, this is so dull, but I learned a lot about rights and photo rights and usage, and it gave me a lot of experience that I wouldn't have had. So I think it's a valuable lesson, especially for people who, because you switched kind of gears in your early 30s. And I think a lot of people, when they're in their early 30s, sometimes are wondering, and I've actually heard this even in 40s and 50s and 60s, but people who they think it's too late to do what their purpose is. And that's just not true. And it actually, like, their past experience does inform what and maybe they needed to have it, you know?
Absolutely. I think the best advice I've received is that hopefully life is long, right? And once you have that perspective, it's much easier to swallow or process whatever that is so large in your life right now. Whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing, I think sometimes it can be really challenging to feel like this isn't, like, you often feel like this is everything, right? Like this is going to be the make it or break it thing, or this hard moment is going to be the decisive thing. And I think usually, yes, sometimes it is the case that those are the decisive moments, but usually things blend out over time. And once you have that breathing room or that perspective to see that time will tell, things become much easier, or you're able to stay in the game for longer as a result.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot from you, I think, in that way, because I've always been so singularly focused on photography, and there's been lots of different types of work, but I think seeing how adaptable you are and how, like, you're much better, I think, at the journey than I am. And so you definitely inspire me to kind of embrace the journey, because it's unusual. I think most people who are high functioning in the way that you're like a big achiever, right? But most high achievers, I think, are very like, they want that gold star at the end, and they kind of beat themselves up if there's, meanderings. And you're not really like that. At least maybe on the inside you don't feel that way, but from the outside, and
Definitely
as someone who's
inside.
but especially as your friend, it's like you seem to handle it with grace, which I admire in you. For sure.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm definitely, I want to make it clear, I'm not above it. I'm definitely immortal. I understand and feel every single part of the process too. But I do think a lot of it starts with your faith in that it will be okay, right? Even if it's uncharted territory, if you can just hold on to the fact that so far things have been okay, or I have been able to achieve whatever, and therefore the likelihood that this is ultimately going to be okay is pretty high too. I think that allows you to move through it faster or easier. Maybe not always with grace. I mean, if my family were listening in on this right now, they would be like, absolutely not. She is crazy. She is definitely not calm and definitely not chill. But yeah, I think it's part of being human and part of the process too. Yeah.
Well, we're multifaceted, right? And I think I have seen you when it's been difficult, and I think that you still handle it with grace. And I think a lot of times when people think that someone's really skilled at something, they just assume that they were naturally like that. And what I've realized is the reason why people have certain superpowers was because it stemmed from a pain point. And so when people are experiencing difficulties, it's a nice way to reframe it, because you're being forced to learn something that then you have the ability to master. And that's a pretty special thing, I think. It's a good part of like life as a journey, right?
Absolutely.
Not to, be a cliche. Yeah. So when you started Doveras, first of all, I know what Doveras is, but let's have you introduce Doveras to our listener.
Sure. So around 6+ years ago, I started Doveras as a very high touch fertility concierge. The long and the short of it is that when I was trying to proactively think about what kind of family I wanted to build, what kind of mother I may or may not want to be, if I wanted to be that, there are very few resources. And I'm dating myself a little bit. There was no, conversations around egg freezing. There were no egg freezing studios or clinics or buses popping up everywhere. And so this became a diligence exercise in itself. My husband knew from very early on that he wanted to be a father and that this was really important to him. And so that's what propelled me to start investigating what that might take. And I was very unsatisfied by not only the answers that I receive, but also the resources out there and understanding fertility. And because of my, training as a healthcare attorney, I felt like I was really well positioned to read clinical studies and understand that information to advocate for myself with physicians, but ultimately felt like it was such an uphill battle. And so I was like, man, I wish somebody could do all of this for me. Like, can somebody call my insurance company? Can somebody help me figure out which clinic to go to? And I would come home at 3 a.m. from my day job as an attorney and then start researching this myself. And so I was trying to find somebody who could do this for me, couldn't find it. And that's when I decided there might be something there. Obviously, had conversations with people about it and realized this was not an issue unique to myself. In a million years, never did I think I would leave law and start a company myself. But that was the origin of Doveras. I started Doveras as this fertility concierge because every single woman I talked to in the workplace about this issue also voiced something similar. And then I decided to expand that to my social circles. And while not everyone understood because it was not a social topic at the time, for people who are probably 10 years ahead of me in life or in their journeys, definitely understood the pain point. And so I decided to take a chance at it. And so I'm very proud to say that, in the last 6 years or so, we've built a leading fertility concierge specializing in really complicated fertility journeys. People who have done 10 plus rounds of IVF, people who have turned to egg donation, sperm donation, and surrogacy to build their families. And we beat industry records and standards in every way, whether that is about the matching process or in the amount of handholding and support that you get. But sometime during the pandemic, I felt like I wanted to do something more with the science. A lot of what our clients were asking us to do was to look into how they could take more control over their fertility destiny. If there's anything that they could do from their lifestyle to really improve their chances outside of what their doctors were helping them with. And I felt like that part was a very universal feeling. Everyone wants to have control over their destiny. But also when it comes to any healthcare issue, you're always trying to see if there's something you could hack together with your lifestyle too. And what I saw in this space was that there were a lot of gurus. There were a lot of people selling fake supplements, a lot of coaches with no medical background trying to give advice. And so it made me wonder if there was something there that I could help fill the void around. And that's when the next iteration of Doveras started.
So, with all of this misinformation that was going out there, so Nara, what did you do about it?
I decided to recruit a small army of PhDs who were specialists in this field, and I decided to build the world's largest clinical database, so medical database on lifestyle factors and how it impacts egg health, sperm health, uterine health. And the reason I started there was because I was curious if I could build consensus science as it relates to fertility and lifestyle, because oftentimes there's very limited research or very limited attention going to categorizing holistic areas of health. And from that, once we did that, I went out to all these great academics and doctors to make sure that they agreed with what we put together. And then it felt like it was time to make it accessible to the everyday user. And so for that, we built a behavior change program. It almost is like a Headspace or like a Noom Calibrate. We talk about the 3 different pillars of fertility health, which are nutrition, toxin reduction, and wellness. And essentially, you give us 10 minutes a week and we give you content that is pretty personalized about what you can do to boost your fertility potential over a 3-month period. We focus on the 3-month period because egg cells and sperm cells take around three months to generate.
That's really fascinating that you've taken your expertise in research and in law, and then also your immense empathy, and you created something that is really serviceable for a lot of people that are struggling with fertility. What kind of clients do you usually have?
On our concierge side, right, the people that require a lot of touch, they're often referred to us by physicians or from their network, including, their personal networks. This is like the client's personal network. And so those people, um, the universal thing is that they really yearn to be parents. They're very intentional about becoming parents. They may be people who have been having fertility challenges for a very long time. They may be LGBTQIA couples who knew from the very beginning that they would need the support and help of another person to also meet their children. They could be people who have health conditions and therefore are struggling to conceive, genetic conditions, and therefore need additional medical support in order to conceive. And obviously, these people are also able to pay for concierge services. So there's a certain affluence to that demographic of clients. But on the digital platform side, we see people who are almost on the opposite end of that spectrum. Most people live in the middle of the US, they're not the coastal elite. They often live 2 hours plus away from the closest OBGYN that they can access. So these are people who really need access to more fertility care and health services. And these people may not be able to afford fertility treatment ever, right? So it's been really rewarding taking the same science and putting it in the hands of folks who need it the most, because I think there is this huge gap in care, but also in the type of medical understanding we have around the care that we should provide, because there's a huge data gap as well.
I mean, hats off to you, because I think what's interesting, because I know you personally too, it's like you're one of the most brilliant minds that I've come across, but you also have one of the biggest hearts. And so I love that you've kind of channeled both of your gifts into being really excellent at research, being really excellent at, being prepared and figuring out solutions and all of these things that your previous careers, like, and just your personality in general, but also you have one of the biggest hearts I've ever seen. So I think it's probably really been such a gift for people that have had access either to the online services or the concierge. But especially right now, we have a lot of reproductive rights that are kind of at risk, and IVF is even at risk. And not just if you're pro-choice or pro-life, or, it's like, it's not just that, but women's health in general is really coming under attack. What can you share about that, and like how, Doveras is helping with that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I applaud you for all the information that you already know about it, because not everyone understands how to talk about it, or that this is even an issue. I think there's two parts to that question. One is just around IVF and education around IVF. And then the second is what we're doing about it. So for those who don't know or are fortunate not to know, IVF is literally a Nobel Science Prize winning technology that allows people who cannot have babies to have babies. It takes egg and sperm, you take it outside of the body, and you're able to fertilize and create embryos to put back in a uterus to be able to develop into a fetus and a baby, hopefully. And it's oftentimes used by people who have fertility challenges because there's something that is an issue with their reproductive organs. It is also used by people who have genetic conditions that are going to result in a baby that's not compatible with life. And so the technology helps you avoid that heartbreak. And also by LGBTQIA members of the community who, obviously need support, because all babies are conceived from one egg, one sperm, and one uterus. And it's a technology that, the WHO says infertility is on the rise, that 1 in 5 couples have infertility, and it's a diagnosis, it's a medical condition. And so it's definitely something that more and more people desire and will need in order to achieve their family making goals. And the reason why Brittany's sharing that it's under attack is because right now there's a huge question around embryo personhood. So earlier this year, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that embryos, which are a group of cells, it's after an egg and a sperm meet, can be considered unborn children and have the same rights as you and I as a born child. And I think that ruling is quite tough and sparked a lot of outrage and debate across the country because oftentimes, even though a lot of parents want their embryos all to become children, that is unfortunately not the case for a whole variety of reasons. Um, the technology is very safe. IVF technology is very safe, so that hopefully there is a best chance at that embryo, the group of cells, becoming a live birth and a baby. But some of those embryos may never make it during the transfer process. Some of those embryos may not ever make it, even if they are transferred into a uterus. And so there's this big fear now about the liability around those embryos if they're all treated as, you and I, as having personhood rights, especially for physicians, for the entire ecosystem, for those shipping companies that deal with the embryos, because obviously the treatment of a group of cells is very different from recognition as a full-on person. And this has sparked a lot of debate across the country also, because just because it's happened in Alabama does not mean that it's restricted to happening in Alabama. A lot of states also followed in thinking about whether embryos should also be treated as humans. And what happened in Alabama immediately after the ruling came down is quite telling. Almost all of the fertility clinics in Alabama, within the first week of the ruling coming down, shut down and paused all their services, their medical services, because they had to figure out what kind of liability they faced before being able to continue to treat fertility patients. And all of the shipping companies that dealt with shipping those embryos also stopped and paused operations because they were worried about the liability of what would happen if they were in possession of those embryos and something happened to those embryos during that time. And at the end of the day, this really hurt people who are trying to build their family, who have been saving up for years, who have been already going through arduous, injection protocols, who are trying to build their families, because all of those medical treatments went on pause as we were trying to find more clarity.
I think what's also really difficult too is with the IVF process, once the embryos are created and they get inserted, they may or may not take. What happens there?
Yeah, and I think the core question you're getting at is the emotional toll of this process, right? As you just said, the embryos are not babies yet, but I think any parent feels like they should be the ones that have decision-making rights over those group of cells, and that it shouldn't be necessarily the state or the government dictating what they should be doing with that. Um, and what the results of any action or inaction should be. And, anyone who has, walked one step or 100 miles on a fertility journey knows how emotionally strenuous this journey is, how much it takes over, how much it, how vulnerable you are in this phase of life on this journey. And so to feel like you have even less of a control sometimes because of the narrative that's going on politically around it, as you can imagine, is incredibly stressful.
It really makes me feel for people. I know several people who've done IVF and that's how they've had their families, and people who have tried IVF and weren't successful after doing several rounds. And it is extremely, extremely emotional. And I don't think people realize too, for the IVF process, you're injecting your body with a super dose of hormones. And it's really like you can get sick, you get cranky, it's like people who are normally very chill are like, I want to kill my husband. It's like, it's a lot and it's extremely expensive. And, it's like, I think too, having families is such a big part of a lot of people's dreams for their life. And so it's a really difficult experience to kind of navigate because there's so many emotions and dreams that sometimes are unfulfilled. And we don't want to add more pressure to people who are already really going through it.
No, and I think there's great organizations that have spoken up about this, right? There's a group called Resolve, which is the National Infertility Network, and they're really trying to educate people around what infertility actually means, they have a lot of resources for those going through fertility challenges that they can get a sense of community. And they also do advocacy, especially in light of the attack on IVF access. And there's also a group called Doctors for Fertility. It's actually a group of fertility physicians who want to educate the public as well as politicians around what IVF actually entails so that they can make better informed decisions in their personal lives as well as when they approach political conversations or legislative conversations around IVF access. But I think taking a step back away from all of this, you set this conversation up a little bit about how this is incredibly politicized. I think one thing that we can all agree on is that thinking about pregnancy more actively is probably going to be a good thing for everybody involved, whether it is the parents, whether it is the next generation. And I think that's core of what we're trying to do at Doveras, right? It doesn't matter what your pathway to parenthood is. If you are trying to have intercourse at home and you conceive, or if you are on a fertility journey that involves a fertility clinic and trying to conceive, right? At the end of the day, we are trying to create more intentional parents, no matter where they are in their journey. And I think that really starts with education around the preconception process. I think one of the craziest things that I discovered was that a lot of what you do in your lifestyle, in the 3 months before the gametes meet, has a crazy outsized impact on not just your fertility, so your timeline to getting pregnant, but also your pregnancy experience and your child's health outcomes. And I think when I discovered that, based on looking at decades of research and also talking to professors and doctors at Harvard, Stanford, Emory, what have you, it was this lightning bulb moment for me because I was like, man, we spend so much energy trying to fix a problem after it's been identified that we do so little to prevent the problem in and of itself, just as in the rest of healthcare. And if everybody could just think about or have conversations proactively about what my fertility looks like, doesn't matter whether you're male or female, because infertility arises equally for both male and female populations, like we would be living in a different world. And I think this is really an apolitical conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in terms of what you've learned, are there some key takeaways that for people who are wanting to have kids or having that conversation or thinking about it in terms of health, things that they can put into practice? Because I think, especially for women's health, there's been very little research, right? Like women's issues are very not funded in terms of like studies and things like that. So in terms of lifestyle and it can be for men and women, but what are some of the key things that you wish more people knew were important?
I wish more people knew that if there are 100 fertility issues, right, that it is equally divided from issues that originate from females, from males, and unexplained. I think there is this outsized focus on the female when we're trying to troubleshoot a fertility challenge. And there's almost very little attention paid to the male or the sperm at the beginning. But what we know now is that it's an even split, that the contribution to infertility is evenly split between male and female issues in terms of percentages. So when we say that there's a fertility challenge, 33% of that originates from usually the woman, 33% from the male, and 33% from unexplained fertility issues. And so I hope that if you're a heterosexual couple, that you are thinking about this from an equal perspective, that both of you are doing equal work and asking questions with your doctor, whether it's your primary care physician or your reproductive endocrinologist or your urologist, about how you can both get assessments done so that one person isn't taking on the physical, mental, and emotional burden more than the other person. Like you got to approach this equally so that you can get to the issue faster. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. The second thing, which you've alluded to a little bit, is women's health has been very under researched. until 1993, women weren't even required to be part of the clinical research in the US. And so if you're over 30 years old in the US, you've been alive longer than women were required as part of clinical trial research, which is crazy. And women were often just treated as smaller men, right? So whatever the medication that they were trying to get through the FDA, you would just make it smaller and prescribe it to women. And we're now realizing that male and female anatomy is different, and therefore health issues are different too. And I'm really passionate about closing that care gap and that health gap. And so, what that often means starts with really thinking inclusively as we build the data set around women's health, right? A lot of the research has been done also on just Caucasian women, but obviously now we know that different issues impact different races differently. And socioeconomic status also contributes to the manifestation of different health conditions disproportionately as well. And so we are in this era where I feel incredibly optimistic about, because we're living in the world of digital health. We're living in the world of AI. Technology has allowed us to make a lot of these barriers to entry so much easier. And so, how can we serve more people with these tools that we already have, whether it's a cell phone or a laptop, um, to be more inclusive, so that we can get better care for people, so that we can diagnose faster and be more preventative in the way we diagnose, is, I think, something that everyone should be thinking about and should be excited about.
Absolutely. Well, and I love that you're supporting much more people that have not been able to have access to these things prior. And I wonder how much of your being a global citizen of the world, how much that has been impacting your perspective, because I think it matters to you that you're giving this access to people. And it's, I think too, like, so when I've asked you this question before, but when I photographed you, many, many times. And one of the times that we were shooting, I asked you to kind of think in 5 years where you wanted Doveras to be and how you wanted to kind of feel with that. And I was thinking you were going to say something about it was going to hit certain metrics, but I really loved your answer and I would really love to hear you talk about it today.
Oh, I think you were asking about like revenue metrics. Like, imagine
Yeah.
Doveras like made
Yeah.
X amount of money, and I
Yeah.
was like, oh, actually, think about how many babies were impacted or born, obviously positively,
Yes.
as a result of Doveras and
Yeah.
our services. I think that's the goal and the vision, to raise awareness and education around what we have in our control from a lifestyle perspective, hopefully to impact our fertility. Obviously, there are cases where no amount of lifestyle is going to make the difference. There are issues that require medical escalation, right? But fully acknowledging that, I think people often want to feel like they've put their best foot forward. And so I always think about it in terms of how many babies and families we've helped serve. And to your earlier question, too, right? Like, um, what are the top lifestyle things that impact um, people? It really depends on what you tell me about you, right? Like, what is your race? What zip code do you live in, right? What is the air pollution in your area? What is your daily lifestyle like? What kind of diet do you have? What kind of environmental exposures do you have? That results in the right set of changes for you. Nobody wants to totally overhaul their lifestyle at any given point, right? Including when they're trying to conceive. And I think we always coach against the perfection mindset. We say 80-20 is actually the best mindset that you can have for sustainable change, right? We don't want you to overhaul your entire life in service of this. And so, what we've seen is that people want to know what the highest impact changes for them would be. And that's going to be different for you versus for me, right? We're different people. We both live in New York City, but have different lifestyles. We're different um, ages. We have different health conditions that are underlying. And so, the
We're
answer
different
is
races
difficult to say.
too.
And different races too, yeah.
Yeah.
And different reproductive histories as well. And so the answer for me is going to be different than an answer for you. There's going to be baseline things that are universal. Like, yes, if you're trying to conceive, you should take a prenatal. Yes, if you are a male, you should quit smoking while you're trying to conceive, because even 2 days of smoking cessation, so stopping smoking for even 2 days, has an impact on the epigenome of the sperm, right? But there are also changes that are more unique, specific to you based on your lifestyle and your history. And we don't want anyone to get on our program and say, oh my gosh, I'm so screwed. I have to make 10,000 changes. That's not the goal. The goal is to make you feel confident about the trade offs that you're making at any given point, to help you focus on the top set of changes that are right for you, and to really educate yourself as you're entering this really remarkable phase of your life, hopefully, which is pregnancy and family building.
Well, and it's a place of empowerment. When you know better, you can do more to do things. And I wonder too, for people who, because there is so little research in like women's health and things like that, like they've now started saying, like if your doctor's not asking you about your sex life and things like that, it might be hiding that you have conditions. So if you're not, like for me, I am child free, this could still help me too, because there's so many things about your life and like how to be a healthy human that my body would only be able to do if it's functioning at 100% in order to have a child. So even though I'm not going to have them, it might show up in other health conditions, because I'm not talking about fertility necessarily to my doctor, but it might be the fact, like maybe if I did this program, I looked into it, looked at the health things and see, because if my body's not in prime optimum, I'm not trying to get pregnant. So we might not know that there's certain things that are a problem, I guess, is like a roundabout way of saying it. Like
Yeah.
this
I
might
mean,
actually help people for health in general. So
well, I think the way we look at it is, first of all, women are not just baby making vehicles, right? And so when you're looking at your fertility health, it should be in the context of your overall health, including your fertility lifespan. So beyond fertility, there's longevity that you want to think about, right? Menopause is part of that equation too, and that's something that all females will have to endure and go through. And so if and also, I guess the second part that I will say is, even when we look at fertility health, our approach is that it is not just about fertility, but an ecosystem of other things that are also working to support your fertility, your metabolic health, your blood sugar regulation. All of these are things that impact ultimately your fertility potential, right? And so there's education that we do around that in part of the 12-week program too. But you're absolutely right in the sense that it shouldn't be an isolated thing. It shouldn't just be about optimizing fertility. While that is the focus, because it is what our clients come to us for, what our patients come to us for, if you are inquiring about your fertility life and your fertility potential and your fertility health, you will probably discover other things about your health too. And we see this in men as well. Their sperm health is indicative of their general overall health as well. And I think that's something that is often overlooked. We should be educating both men and women about just how our bodies work and what this means, to have a menstrual cycle, to be avoiding pregnancy, what the timeline in general looks like from a horizon standpoint. What that looks like is so critical and important. I myself, I'm like, okay, what's next? Can somebody start educating me a little bit about how not to get pregnant again if I'm done with having children, or if I think my family building journey is complete as of now? If I wanted to reactivate that, like, what does that look like? There's nobody talking about that. I want people to be talking about menopause education, because I've seen women in my life go through menopause, and I feel like it is a total surprise to them when it happens, even though centuries of women have gone through menopause. And I just think there is very siloed conversations going on that shouldn't be going on in that manner, that it should be something that is part of destigmatized discourse.
absolutely. I mean, there's just not enough research for women, and we're half the population. So it's like how our hormones are impacted for certain things. It is kind of, I don't know. I think that is something that I wish was different and I think should be more part of the conversation socially. I think people who are struggling with fertility are usually pretty private about it and they don't even tell their closest friends about it because there's a lot of shame that they can't control it. It's like, and I think that there's that, like it's helpful, I think, for us to talk about it. And I think that people put a lot of pressure on something that's already very pressurized. But I think too, like we don't know much about the body for women. And I think a lot of legislature, like there's not a lot of information, like people who are making a lot of the rules are not aware of the process. They're not sure what is entailed and they're making laws without talking to doctors. And, it's like, and I think that that's really scary. And I think that that's why I was really excited that you wanted to be on, that when I asked you, you were open to it because I think it's important to have this conversation. This is impacting a lot of people. And I think too, because you have a law degree and a law background, more than a lot of other people how important it is for the laws to say things, that there's so many ways of wording things. Like I've worked with contracts that were about my stuff, which has nothing to do with fertility, about photo rights. And you're so good at like noticing this could be taken out of context. This needs to be rewritten a different way. You don't, it's like, you're so precise. And I think that that gives you a particular perspective on how things need to be written, how things need to be, for education purposes, because there's so many ways that things can get distorted. And when you don't know, you don't know. And so for the people who are in charge, they really need to talk to people like you who are, for one, experts in the law, but two, are experts in this particular field. So yeah, I think it's like fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's really become a spotlight issue, especially with the upcoming election. And my
Yeah.
hope there is that regardless of what your religious beliefs are or what your sexual preferences are, that people have the humanity to understand how difficult this journey is for some in an increasing part of the population, and that, you know, there are a lot of ways to build a family. Um, there are very beautiful families out there that only exist because of technologies like IVF.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's really lovely. Like, I remember when we were shooting, you had said, because I was talking about the business because the purpose of the shoot that we were doing was about like marketing and business and how we wanted the brand to kind of come across. And so I was like thinking about Doveras inaccurately. I was thinking of it more as a business, right? And when you said, you're like, actually, that's not really what drives me. What drives me is thinking about all of the families that I created. And I was like, God damn it, Brittany.
No, I mean,
like, but that's of course it's like you are very much like thinking about like that's your purpose. Your purpose is to use your unique gifts and you are creating such a beautiful platform that's really helping people. And I think that that's so cool.
thank you. No, and to be very clear on that moment, it is a business, right? And I think it has to operate like a business. I have a duty to do that. But the facial expression you were trying to elicit was tied to purpose.
Yes, exactly.
Which is why that comment came up.
Yes, that is true. That is a good distinguisher because I mean, I think you are the CEO and founder of this company and you have to protect and guard the company because if the company doesn't exist, then you can't help people, right? So it's like, I think often when people work in fields where they help people, like I think therapists encounter this all the time and doctors and things like this, it's like they're helping people, but they also have to run it as a business because if the business doesn't succeed, then they can't provide the services, and so I'm sure it comes up a lot because yes, especially for the concierge, it's a higher price point because it's a lot of work and a lot of experts that you're paying and there's a lot of stuff on the back end. So I love that you have found a way to make it accessible for people who aren't necessarily in that kind of life stage or affluence, but you've done what you can to work for, to have the science work for people everywhere, which is just like so cool. Which kind of leads me into Siren Song. So you're one of my subjects for Siren Song. So what would you say? So for the listener who is just joining us, Siren Song is a personal project that I've started where I wanted to kind of showcase women in particular who are disruptors, who are change makers, who are using their voice to make the world a better place. So Nara, what would your siren song be? What is your legacy and passion that you want to leave with the world?
I hope that it is one where there is a more proactive and inclusive world of parenting, and becoming parents. That might have a lot of different chapters or flavors to it or interpretations to it, but I think that's what gets me going and is my North Star at the moment.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. So what advice, I have a couple of questions and I know I'm trying to be responsible of your time. So what advice would you give your younger self, either that as a child, teenager, or even 10 years ago?
Kind of goes back to earlier in our conversation. I am a pretty impatient person. May not come off that way, but I think, I'm my own worst critic, very harsh on myself because I am a type A overachiever. But if I could go back and give myself advice, it is to have the faith that I think I have a little more of now, that things will turn out okay and that you are on the right path. Because I think that faith drives so much of the success. People call it manifesting, whatever. There's a lot of different ways to label it, but I think that really helps in making you enjoy and trust the journey.
Yeah, I love that. Trust the journey. Oh, that's a life lesson that I mean, I think you're
That is
good
a
at it.
life
It
lesson.
is a life lesson. It's like, I think it's something that I'm not very particularly good at. I'm still working on that, and I think that's kind of one of the benefits of the podcast is you can
Mm,
see from other people. Sometimes it's hard to see when it's yourself. And so when you
totally.
learn from other people and their stories and it's like to kind of bring it full circle, it's like grew up all over the world, you had impacts from learning from other ways of life and ways of thinking, and the jobs that your parents had gave you access to a different type of life too. And I think that thinking about things like you kind of operate in the world with elegance and grace, and you're very smart, like incredibly brilliant and very, very fast and quick. And I think it's interesting that you kind of have taken that high achievement and your excellence in academia to now use that skill and your big, big heart, that to help a lot of people. And I think it's such a gift that you're fulfilling your life's purpose in this way. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the other way to say it is that I really believe in this because I see this a lot with the fertility journeys that we serve, is that beautiful things happen in their own time. It's so hard to understand when you are still trying to get to that destination, but I do think um, if you have faith, it happens.
Well, and to have the support too, I think that definitely you've been an asset for me, like when I've been in the thick of it, and you're able to take that kind of bird's eye view and pull back that perspective and give me guidance and support. And so, yeah, I think that it's important to have that community. It's important to have people that you trust, who are people who inspire you to be better for yourself, who have also different life experiences where you can learn from, because in some it's like it's some people are better at certain things than others, and so we can kind of feed off of each other and be like, okay, I'm really good at this, you can learn from this, and then I can learn from you from this, and it's I love that.
Well, I feel like you provide the same for me too. So, right back at you
Oh,
would be
thank
what
you.
I say.
I appreciate that. Sometimes I'm like the friend that I'm like always like, I need this, so it's I appreciate that. So for you, for yourself, we talked about Doveras in 5 years, but for you personally, where do you want to see yourself in 5 years?
If I had contributed, if through the digital platform we contributed back to the research and had an impact in closing the research gap and the gender gap, right now, a lot of what we do with our digital health programs, they're called the pre-pregnancy cleanup and the IVF support program, is to gain insights into what works for different populations. And if we can get to a scale where we have those insights in 5 years, that helps people predict and understand reproductive health journeys better. I think that would be the ultimate goal for me. Um, Obviously, separate from that in my personal life, I hope I still find as much joy and curiosity as I do today in the work that I do. I have a lot of faith and trust in this moment that we see in women's health, in reproductive health, and digital health in general. And I think that's a big part of what keeps me motivated to do the work and to serve the families that I do. And I hope that the larger landscape, whether politically or legislatively, allows me to continue doing that in 5 years.
I love that. And I think too, like, so you have two kids, and I think you have a little girl and a little boy. And so I won't say their names just for privacy purposes, but it's like, but like, what would you want to say to your kids that you'd want them to take from like this period of your life?
I think when they're old enough to understand, I hope they know that at a time when Roe v. Wade was overturned and a lot of people were having difficulty building their families and a lot of women were suffering as a result of those consequences, that their mom was trying to help those people.
Yeah. I mean, you're definitely like, I think there's so many ways of activism and to contributing to society. And often people think that you have to be a politician or you have to, like, that's the way to do it. And there's every single person in our world can contribute. It's like whether that's being an advocate or if it's like learning about things and providing services, or, there's so many ways of contributing to the world and we need everybody's unique voice. I do believe every single person. I think because I really like mythology and folklore, and there's this kind of concept of that every single person has their own unique genius. And the purpose of this life is to find your unique gift and your unique genius in order to help the world, to kind of change the conversation. And so I kind of love that that's something that you're going to make, you're, part of making history. I hope in, 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to be in a different landscape. And you're going to, the fact that you're one of the leading providers of this information, you know, we'll see. Cover of
We'll
Forbes.
see.
Forbes.
Yeah. I'll come back and
So,
listen to this podcast because it'll be a time capsule and we'll see how much
yeah.
I knew or how much I didn't know, probably.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of the beauty, is, for someone who's been a photographer for my whole life, it's like I've photographed you I photographed basically every time you've been pregnant, we've had a shoot. And
Mm-hmm.
one of our
That's
most
correct.
recent shoots, you didn't have a baby in you. And I was
That's
like,
right.
this is so
That
weird.
was a first. That was a
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. So it's like, but I love that we can
Perfect.
look back at those photos. And one of the shoots that we did, your first child, you were only 3 months along. And so she hadn't been born yet. And so it's kind of fun because you weren't showing yet, but we always have those photos. It's like, it is a bit of a time capsule that we are able to, I know the public wouldn't know from looking at that photo,
But you and
but
I
we know.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like our little secret.
Yeah. You see the progress of time through what you've captured. And I think beyond that, I know, and as you said, the other situations that surrounded those moments, in my life, that's also when I think um, critical things were happening with Doveras that made me really excited about taking on new challenges too. And so and for the next shoot, I was pregnant with my son, and a lot of expansion was happening with the company during that period as well. And so definitely, I think that's the magic of what you capture, and some of the questions that you pose and ask that really look into my soul in those moments. My expressions are different based on the questions you ask, and you can tell.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts. Like that's why I ask the questions that I ask, because then, especially if it's like as I don't usually like reveal like when I'm releasing the photos, like what were the questions that asked to get those, but I know, and it's like a little Easter egg for myself. And so it's fun because often it's, people's faces completely change. So when I
Mm-hmm.
say, think about this particular loved one, or think about this child, or think about how you want to be in 5 years or whatever. Now we have that frozen in time. And
Exactly.
I really love that. And the podcast for me has been kind of an extension of that because, photography is it's through me, right? It's through how I see the world. It's through glass. It's through the way that I'm able to capture and to get those emotions. And so I like kind of the raw nature of this platform and this kind of new medium because the purpose is still me asking questions. It's still, especially because I know everybody that I have photographed that's going to be on the podcast. It's not like it's a rando stranger who I've never met. So I have kind of insider information. So I know what questions to ask, but I kind of love the rawness and the kind of, I don't know what you're going to say. Like, I know what I think you're going to say, but I don't know actually what you're going to say. And I love that you're able to use your own voice and to kind of, what are the things, that's kind of the lovely part about conversation, right? If you already know the answer, then there's no point in having the question, It's
Exactly.
So yeah, it's just, it's fun. Okay. So I've got one last question for you. I always ask people, since we're talking about questions, I always ask people to think of their secret delight. That's supposed to stay a secret. So you don't have to reveal that. What is a not so secret, or what is something that that's a delight to you currently that you'd be open to sharing?
There are so many delights. Obviously, a lot of them have to do with my children. But I think one delight that immediately comes to mind is having a nice solo lunch at a restaurant, sitting at the bar or at a cafe and having a leisurely lunch to myself is definitely a delight.
I
Not so
love
secret
that.
delight. Yeah.
I think for a busy working mom, having a time to just breathe and remember who you are again is definitely a big delight.
It's a big delight. Yeah.
One of my favorite memories was we went to your house in the country. I won't say where. And it was your first night leaving your baby. And it was interesting because you hadn't left her ever yet. And I was so honored that I got to be like the first person that you got to like have an overnight, slumber party essentially with. And it was just so fun because I think for you, you're like, I feel like myself again. And we had to hide in your dining room because we didn't want your husband to look at us in the cameras, and we were dancing like crazy people. And we had FaceTimed our friend who lives in Singapore. And it's one of those things where I think, for the majority of the conversation, we've had professional Nara, and I love like getting a little glimpse of like the fun Nara who like was turning the lights on and off and dancing to music. And, it's just, there's so many parts of you that I love. And I think having someone like you in another person's corner, it's a big gift. And so I'm grateful for you, and I love you to pieces. So
thank you. Well, nobody should be watching that video.
Well, thankfully we hid in the corner. Sure. We hid in the corner, so hubby can't be watching. Sometimes you just got to have girl time.
I think he's seen enough, but definitely.
Absolutely. He's a good guy. He's one of the guys I really like. I don't particularly love straight men generally, but I love him.
I love that
awesome.
Statement.
I usually do really well with gay men or Europeans, but I think Byron, he's one of the good. Oh, I just said his name. Hopefully is that okay that I said his name?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I'm trying to be careful of like privacy. When
yes. Yeah. Littles, but I appreciate on the kids. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, yeah, we love Byron. He's a good time. So he's a sweetie.
He has a good time.
Yeah. Well, Nara, I don't want to take up your whole day, even though as much as I would love to spend the whole day with you, you're a busy woman saving the world. So I just want to thank you again for being on the show today. And how can people find you? How can they find you online? If there's a way that they wanted to work with you, tell the people what they want to know.
You can find us at doveras.com. That's DOVE, like the bird, dove, RAS.com.
Awesome. And then you do use Insta, right? For Doveras?
We're on social media, LinkedIn. Yeah.
Do the same. Okay, great. I think for people who, want to kind of, you guys do put some really cool information that I think is applicable. So even if you're not wanting to start a family anytime soon, just for even health reasons, it's good to kind of have that information in your back pocket. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nara. It's been a real treat to see you today.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you for having me, Brittany.
Mwah. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you liked this episode, and I hope you did, I would love if you could leave a rating and a review. I am going and reading through some, and if you are lucky to be chosen, I love to reward a gold star at the end. So we have a great review from Yay or Nay. I really wish I knew who you were, but I love the name. It's so cute. Brittany is so raw and honest. I can't wait for more. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you love the oversharing. You're welcome. If you would like to get your name read out, fantastic. We love to reward good behavior and a gold star at the end. Feel free to do that on all the platforms, and thank you so much. If you'd like to follow along with my socials, Brittany Ambridge across the board, and my website is the same. And then the credits, we have beautiful cover art by Stephanie Brookler, and my producer, big thanks to him, Juan Pony Media.